This podcast is sponsored by Teens and Youth in Leadership, CYIL Africa, an organization that is committed to raising generations of young leaders across Africa. Our programs include leadership education, leadership fellowship, research training, webinars, and conferences. Stay informed of our programs by following us on LinkedIn at CYIL and at CYIL Africa on Instagram.
Hello, my name is Israel Idari. I'm a social scientist and a pragmatist. As a social scientist, my research is focused on understanding how youth develop leadership to make social change within their communities and immediate environment. I'd like to invite you to this podcast where I interview and have conversations with scholars and practitioners on their perspective on leadership, followership, and social change. I hope you truly learn from this podcast. Have fun. Today, I have with me Marc Hurwitz. Marc is a Chief Insight Officer at Flip University, an Associate Professor at the University of Waterloo, and the convener of the prestigious Global Followership Conference. Thank you so much, Marc, for accepting to do this with me.
I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so today I want to talk about your experiences in terms of, followership. I know that in the past you used to be in the industry, you used to work heavily, and you still do through consulting. But what actually birthed, this subject of followership?
Yeah, so it's a confluence of things that happened to me all around the same time. I was an executive at a very large financial services organization, and we'd just gone through a major merger and acquisition. In fact, we just acquired a very large competitor. All sorts of things were going on around me. If you've ever been involved in an M&A, there's always redundancies, like people get fired because you've got two of everything, right? And so there's a lot of decisions that need to be made about who you keep and who you don't keep and all those kind of things. And I was really puzzled by some of the decisions that were made. Why were some people who I thought were technically really strong and had great leadership skills, why were they not the ones who were chosen? And this particularly was of interest to me because I just finished doing my MBA, right? And so I'd learned a lot about leadership and leadership theory and all these kind of things. And it didn't seem to align with what I was seeing. So that was the first thing that was happening. I just had this real need to understand. And it led me to one of two conclusions, one of which was the people around me were kind of idiots and making bad decisions, which, I think we all have our moments where we think that in our corporate lives. Or it could be that something was going on here below the surface that I didn't really understand. So that was kind of the first thing that had happened to me. And the second was much more personal because my job and all this was fairly safe. And that was that I just got a new boss. And for the first time in my career, I had a new boss who didn't choose me, who didn't give me my job offer, right? They inherited me. And we didn't get on well, and there were various things that happened, and I kind of thought she was a bad leader, which, now that I'm an expert in the field, yes, she was a bad leader. And I could have just left it there, but I also wanted to think more deeply about it. And so as I was mulling about what was going on from my own personal role, as well as this weird stuff that was going on in this merger and acquisition, I began to kind of wonder if there's something that no one talks about, which is the flip side of leadership, and that is followership. And then I did some self-reflection and realized, okay, yes, my boss was a bad leader, for sure. But I don't think I was a very good follower either. And so I had to take some accountability for that. And at this point, I had no intention of leaving my job. I had no intention of becoming an academic. I had no intention of, studying the field of leadership and followership. I was at that time in marketing, which, pretty far away. But I got really intrigued by the idea. It's also about the time I met my partner. And she came from the other company that was being acquired, and she was having some struggles with her new boss. And we started talking about this, and we basically wondered if maybe it was her followership as well that was the problem. So we tried a few things, and they worked. They worked like magic. She went from thinking, oh my gosh, I may not stay in this job at all, I might get fired, to being her boss's right hand. Like, it was that powerful an impact in just a matter of weeks. And we realized that something big was here that no one was talking about. And so ultimately, I decided I didn't want to stay in this was a few years later, I decided I didn't want to stay in the organization, and I got a chance to go do my PhD. And I really dug into this topic of followership and became more and more convinced that it was hugely important, and not just for careers, that it was also important for making sense of what was going on around me. And so that's an important domain of followership. It was important for equity, because sometimes people just didn't do followership in the way other people were expecting it. And because of that, they were just not getting results. But it also comes up in thinking that, hey, just because I'm following this person doesn't mean I am less than. And so it's a way of redressing this kind of imbalance in power. And then the final one is just governance, like who should be leading and who should be following. And we don't spend enough time asking this question. So I got super interested in the topic, and I just couldn't let it go. And well, here I am today, 15 years later, and it's been a really exciting ride.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. That's really an inspiring story. I'm interested in knowing when you started thinking and talking about followership, particularly when you started researching about it, did you have any pushback?
Oh my gosh, did we have pushback? So about a year into working on this, we got our first client, which was super exciting. It was another large financial institution, and HR, in fact, it was their human resources function that wanted to improve their followership. So we had a great chat with the vice president about this. And the one thing she said to us was, I want you to teach people followership, but you can't call it that. Okay. So you can call it like leader support or team support, but don't use the F word, because people won't resonate with that. So, this was our first client. We wanted the job. We said, okay, no problem. and I gotta say that the whole first few years, so this is back in the mid-aughts, like around 2000 and I'm trying to think, 2006, 2007, we got a lot of pushback, and a lot of clients wouldn't even let us use the term. So that was not an uncommon situation. And even when we did use the term, sometimes people in the audience would kind of look at us initially as kind of somewhat shocked and maybe even a little offended. By the end, they'd usually come around, and sometimes they were our biggest supporters, but we did. What's changed since then, I think, is social media. So we started noticing, especially our younger people involved in our sessions, no longer cared because they're used to following on social media, and they don't see that as a big deal. And it has gradually been entering the lexicon. There's been some articles in some big journals and some big newspapers and places like HBR and stuff like that. So I think people are coming around. We don't get pushback anymore. In fact, that's not quite right. We do get pushback, but the people we get pushback from aren't the people who are actually out there doing the real stuff in the world. They're the academics and the professional coaches or the professional trainers who have a huge amount of, what they do is kind of tied up in the leadership industry. So they don't really want to hear about followership. But for people like, I was going to say like you and me, but we're kind of not the right example. But for people, yeah. But for people that we talk to who are like just in organizations, we don't get pushback anymore. It's kind of like, oh yeah, finally someone has given voice and names to these things that I know have been true. So we're definitely at a tipping point. What's still difficult sometimes are the gatekeepers who still feel like it's this word we shouldn't really talk about because they're still kind of caught up in this heroic idea of leadership, and leaders do things to people to make them work better and all that kind of stuff, which is, in my opinion, rubbish. Um, it's a relationship like anything else, and you need two people to make a relationship work. So it's gone down, but to actually get the message out there is going to require a whole lot of change in other places, specifically in the whole leadership industry, which is about $400 billion a year industry. Like, it's a massive industry. So there's a lot of entrenched uh, ideas out there that we're working to change.
Yeah, I'm going to make reference to your book shortly. Leadership is half the story. But while you're sharing your experience, I remembered one of the conversations I had with your partner, Sam, and we were planning towards the Global Followership Conference 2025. And I told her that there was this huge journal outlet that had just published about followership. And she told me that when you both started, you proposed the subject of followership to this particular journal, and there was this strong pushback. And she was very happy. She was very impressed seeing that maybe 20 years after, this journal outlet is now publishing on followership. So that's just to support your word about the pushback in the industry coming from academia.
And congratulations on that, by the way. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, thank you. So your book on leadership is half the story. It has been highly referenced, and it has been a great tool for leadership and followership development. What inspired you to write about this subject matter? In that book, you're not just talking in defense of followership, you're talking about how the two components, leadership and followership, can come together to collaborate. So what inspired you in writing that book?
That's a great question and a kind of a funny story. So we originally tried to publish the book, a book, I should say, around 2010 or 11, and we just felt we wanted to get some of the ideas out there. So we found an agent, and they went around to all the major publishers in New York, and they said, what they're telling us is it just isn't aspirational enough. And this was a book purely on followership, and we were like super puzzled. But I guess it's just the F word thing where people don't really want to hear about it. But it did get us start to thinking that maybe all we had done is taken this kind of heroic leadership idea and turned it into more of a heroic followership idea. We also met a really interesting gentleman, and his ideas called polarity thinking. His name is Barry Johnson. And it's the idea how we often get trapped in these polarities. Like, we think of either one thing or the other. And the minute we start seeing the downsides of the one thing, we quickly race to see the upsides of the other. And so we switch from one pole to the other. And we kind of felt like, when it comes to leadership and followership, I wonder if we've just seen some of the downsides of leadership and have become followership devotees. But if you spend too much time on followership, then maybe the opposite happens and you suddenly see the downsides of followership. And we realized that aspirational wasn't really the problem with the book. It was that it wasn't balanced. So I don't think the right answer is to replace leadership with followership. But I think the right answer is ultimately to understand how the two work together to create great partnerships, great collaborations. You literally cannot have one without the other. And so we started thinking, how do they work together as a system? And that's where we came up with this idea that leadership is half the story, that to really understand the story, it's not that you need to just understand followership, but you need to understand both leadership and followership and how they work in harmony, or sometimes not, to make things happen. And so we rewrote the book with that in mind. We then took it to 5 different publishers, and 4 of them said yes, they wanted to publish the book. So we kind of felt like at that point we'd at least gone in the right direction. However, I will say that if you take a look at how much stuff there is out there in the world about leadership versus how much there is about followership, it's hugely imbalanced. There is way more stuff out there about leadership than you'll find about followership. And that's why we decided that we still need to have an emphasis on followership, just so we can rebalance the equation before we get people to really see how the two things work together. So in a lot of the work that we do, like the Global Followership Conference, we want to elevate followership with the long-term objective of showing how the two work together in harmony. But to get there, you got to kind of understand each of them, right? And so that's part of our mission.
Well, thank you for sharing. So I want to talk about the Global Followership Conference. So personally, I've been a beneficiary of Global Followership Conference in two ways. Number one, conference provided me the opportunity to travel to a new country. Then number two, the conference actually gave me the opportunity to meet the best scholars in the field of followership and leadership. And I see the efforts put into making sure that the conference actually achieve its goal, and also that the conference gets better as the year passes. Next year will be the fifth edition, and I know that you'll have bigger goals for next year. You're going to be having it in multiple countries.
Yeah.
So how did this vision start?
That's a really tough question to answer and a great one. So in 2018, and I've done this before, I said to Samantha, I said, we ought to have a conference. I said do this to her in like 2015 or 16 or whatever. And she just looked at me like I was taking crazy pills. I'm like, no, we're not doing that, Mark. And I think I just caught her at a weak moment in 2018. And she said yes. And I'm like, okay, then let's do it. And we found five other colleagues of ours at the time who were also interested. And we did everything on a shoestring. I mean, we still do. We basically self-fund everything, and nobody gets paid or anything out of this. So we try and make the conference as accessible to everybody as we can. But we started working on it, and it took us a little over a year to actually get everything in place. And then we had the very first conference in 2019 in Waterloo, at the University of Waterloo, where I work, at the end of which it was exhausting. I got to tell you, putting on a conference, there were 120 people from all over the world, and it was 2 or 3 days of chaos and fun and great sessions and good people, at the end of which we were both exhausted. We said, oh, we'll never do this again. And I thought, well, maybe we do it in a year or two, but I'm not going to say anything yet to Sam, because she's like, yeah, she took a lot of the hit for how much work went into that conference. Well, then, of course, we all know what happened in 2020, right? So COVID hit, and that derailed us anyway for a few years. But when it was over, we started thinking, okay, time to get back at it maybe. So 2023, we had our second one, which was fantastic, and that was in Virginia at
Christopher Newport University.
Christopher Newport. I don't know why that slipped my mind. Oh my goodness. And then we said, okay, that was great. And we just got lots of people who said, hey, we want you to have a conference at our location and whatever. And so we said, okay, to one of them, and went to Strathclyde in Glasgow the next year. And then Ron Riggio, who is, not only absolutely fabulous guy, but a top scholar in leadership and followership, said, hey, come on to Claremont McKenna, which was too good an opportunity to turn down. And we've just kind of kept going ever since, every year seeming to get just that much better. And I don't know how. So that's been fabulous. And then next year, we've already got Brisbane, Australia, for April. And then in July, it's going to be at Indiana Wesleyan University in Indiana, and more to come, because I'm only mentioning two, but we have more than that under discussion at the moment.
Yeah, I know. I'm currently sitting on the committee for Germany. Yeah, so we're hoping that works out well. So since the conference started, what has been your biggest success?
I'm going to say twofold. The first is, and I hope everybody feels this when they're at the conference, when they leave, like we're really creating community and connecting people to other people who are interested in followership. And that's not just academics, but practitioners are come. I don't know how many research projects have come out of this, but there have been lots. I also think people have had engagements that come out of this. Sam and I have, in fact, we've worked with companies that have come to this and decided, wait a second, this is something we really need. So it's been very practical. And I think the other thing is there are just people who feel like they are lone wolves in their country. They've been working at it for years and with no one else who thinks like they do. It's really been a wonderful, wonderful, life-altering experience for some of them to show up at these conferences. I can think of Wajiha from Pakistan and Chris Mano from Sweden and Mikey from Germany. That has been, for me, the most exciting thing about the conference is really just the people. And I don't know about you, but I've been to lots of different conferences, especially leadership conferences around the world. This just has a different vibe, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, what stands out in the Global Followership Conference is, the closing activity. First one I attended was when we did some activity with rope in Christopher Newport University.
Yes.
And, the one that just concluded in June or July, we ended it with a group cycling activity where we all shared our experiences. And, that to me actually brought this sense of community and, unity. So my final question, do you think followership has gained significant influence over the years?
Yes, I do. And I think that's growing. Is it growing quickly? Not yet. So I don't think we've hit that inflection point where it suddenly has this mass a change in the way people are thinking. I will say that is true in some countries more than others, though. I have a Google alert for the word followership. And the number one country in the world where I see followership showing up on my news feeds is Nigeria.
Ooh.
And there's a history behind that. It's because Ira Chalif actually early on took a trip to Nigeria and actually introduced it as an idea in the country. And it really seems to have taken off there, which is intriguing to me. So someone famously said that ideas, at least in terms of academia, don't spread so much based on the power of the ideas and their ability to take over, but on the leaving, either by retirement or other ways, of academics who support existing ideas. And so I think that the slow relative growth right now of followership has to do with there is so much resistance in the leadership industry and the academic leadership industry, which will slowly change over time. But I am seeing a much faster uptick in the corporate world in interest from companies and from consulting firms. So I think it's coming. It's coming, but we're still small and growing, and we have to kind of do things a little differently to get the voices heard.
If there is any research in the field of followership that you believe should be embarked on, what do you think that should be?
Oh my gosh. Well, and the reason I say, oh my gosh, is because if anyone out there listening to this says, I'm thinking of doing a PhD, this is such a wide open field. There are so many things that are unexplored. For example, I know that there's some research going on to actually see what managers really do from a followership perspective. Of course, there's a famous PhD thesis, which was basically what managers do and was all about sort of their leadership traits. But no one's really investigated followership in the wild, as it were, in terms of management. I think that's a big one. I saw an early study on followership and EI, which was a master's thesis and was excellent, and I think opens up some really intriguing questions about whether it's leadership or followership that emotional intelligence is important from. Like, the field is essentially as big as you want it to be. And I think that that's the one place I really want to see just a lot more research, a lot more qualitative, grounded research. And then ultimately, my long-term goal isn't even that. My long-term goal is to actually see research being done on leadership followership systems. I've seen almost none of it. One article from a colleague of mine, which he couldn't find a a top journal to put it in. In fact, he couldn't even find a second-tier journal to put it in. He essentially self-published it. But it's a fabulous piece of work. I'm trying to get some stuff published in that. And if you were to say to me 20 years from now, what would I like to see from a research perspective? I actually think this idea of leadership followership systems is where we will be going, and certainly where we ought to be going, because I see it everywhere. And once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Thank you so much. I think that's all of my question for this podcast. But I have one personal question for you. So if you were to have a superpower, what would that be?
Oh my goodness. Whoa. If I was to have a superpower, what would it be? Well, there's so many. I would kind of like to fly. If I could have a superpower, I think, look, here's what I love doing, and here's my life's mission. And it's not even leadership and followership per se. I love teaching. And that for me is pretty much the most meaningful thing I can do. So if I had a superpower, maybe it would just be to open up the minds of the people I'm teaching even more, to see more possibilities. It's kind of a subtle superpower, and I'm working on it. But that's really, I think, what I would love to have.
Well, thank you so much, Marc, for your time today. I have learned a lot from this interview, and I'm sure that the listeners would also learn. If you want to follow up with Marc, you can reach out to him over LinkedIn or any social media platform.
Thank you, Israel. It's been a great pleasure, as always, whenever we have a chance to chat.
Thank you so much, Marc.
Thank you for listening to the Future of Leadership podcast today. If you are here to kindly share, subscribe, leave a review, and follow us across our social media platforms, including Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, all at TYIL. See you in the next episode.